Welcome back to this interview. In today's video, we'll be talking about prototype inheritance. Have you ever seen code like this and wonder what's going on behind the scene or what's happening at all? Then this video is for you. Inheritance in JavaScript is very similar to classical object-oriented inheritance in most programming languages. But if you don't know what this means, it's fine. For people who already know, it's a good way to draw a comparison that there still exists a relationship between two objects, two classes, where one is a parent and one is a child, meaning that one object can have properties from another object or from another class. What this does is that it allows for less repetitive code and more efficient memory use and some unique design patterns in your code, but it is somewhat different and has different properties. One thing before we go into prototypical inheritance is I would like to remind of something we talked about in one of our previous videos. What is the keyword this refers to in JavaScript? As you may recall, it doesn't matter where the function is declared. The keyword this always refers to an object on the left side of the dot notation. So just keep that in mind as we continue our discussion. The first thing you need to know is that all objects in JavaScript have this property called proto. This property gets created automatically, and doesn't matter how you create an object, it is going to be on it automatically. So for example, if I create an object using bracket notation, this property is still going to be there. Or if I create an object using this new notation, a constructor function, which I had already created, it will still be there too. Proto property refers to another object. All the properties on that another object are accessible to object we have. So let's demonstrate that. Now if we try to access the name property in our object, even though we never declared the name property in our object, we will be able to access it through the proto. You can see how this is useful. You can have many objects referring to the same property and not have duplicated code or functions across all objects. This way you can have one object holding the data or the functions and have many objects that are able to use those functions without having to copy the same functions over and over onto them. Now I would like to remind you guys, even though function that we are using is in a different object that our object is referring to through proto, it's still usable, and here I'm going to demonstrate that. So I have two objects. One is cat1, cat2. They have different name, Tom, Lucy. And I have an object that I'm going to use, that I'm going to assign to proto, and it's going to have one function called logname. All it does is returns the name of this. As we discussed, this refers to the object on the left side of the dot notation. So I go and connect the proto object to the use object, and I do the same thing for cat2. Now if I type cat1 dot logname, I get a function. Even though I didn't declare it here, I'm getting it through the proto, and proto refers to this object, and this object has this function, and that's what I'm getting. So even though I have the same function, I will be using it to display the name of both cats, and the way I can handle that is through this keyword here. I get Tom, and same thing for cat. Now we talk about prototype. So whenever we create a function, JavaScript automatically creates a property on that function that's called .prototype. It gets assigned in an almost empty object. But hold on, a property on a function? I thought properties could be only added to objects. Well, in JavaScript, most things are like objects or either are objects. So yes, you can have properties on a function. Let's take a look. So if we create a function ABC, it has property called prototype, which is in an object. And it has a property called constructor, but we'll talk about that later. So for the most part, this object is an empty object. Now remember our conversation earlier, we said that every object has a proto object, and that proto refers to a prototype of a function. So let's test it out. Let's say we create a function called person. And in this function, we just assign name. Now we create an object from this. So what we're testing is that if proto of this object P is equal to the prototype of function person. Let's see. And yes, they are the same thing. Alright, time to take a look at bigger picture. We have a diagram here. In this diagram, we are showcasing multiple relationship using prototype and proto. So here we have these all boxes are represents objects, and even though these are functions, they are also objects. So we can see we have object, its proto refers to the prototype of function foo, then which is also an object, and then its proto can refer to another object, and so on. This chain of objects proto referring to another object, and then so on, can keep going on until it reaches to the final object. The final object the proto refers to is the object itself. This is native to JavaScript. No, both in Node.js and in browser, you will have this final object as the last thing in the proto chain. And as you can see, why it looks like a chain. This is why it's called prototype chain as well. All right, so last thing. Let's say you create an object through bracket notation. What does the proto refers to? Since if we create through new notation, the proto refers to the prototype of the function we created it with. Now, if you create it through bracket notation, what does it refer to? So the answer is simple. If you create any object through bracket notation, the proto of that object refers to the object itself, the object with big O, the last object in the JavaScript prototype chains. And that's all for this topic now. And if you have any questions or comments, leave them under the video. And don't forget to subscribe and like.